Hey, let's take a break from polished history for a moment. We're not talking knights in glory. We're talking chamber pots, lice, and streets that reeked for miles. This is what life actually felt like in the Middle Ages. Hard, cramped, unsanitary. And if you're thinking, I'd have survived just fine, we'll see. So, if you're into history that doesn't flinch, go ahead, mark the video, leave something honest below. And subscribe if you're done with fairy tales. Now, close your window. You're about to enter a world where the air itself was dangerous. In the modern world, we flush and forget. One push of a handle, and it's gone out of sight, out of mind. A marvel of engineering, a quiet miracle we rarely stop to appreciate. But for most of human history, going to the bathroom was anything but private, sanitary, or safe. In fact, for centuries, your waste didn't leave your life. It stayed in your streets, in your home, in your drinking water. It shaped your environment. It influenced your health. And yes, it helped kill millions. This is the untold story of medieval sanitation, the raw, unfiltered truth of how Europe wiped, washed, and endured a world with no toilets, no plumbing, and no understanding of germs. Let's go back. Not to the Renaissance, not even to the fall of Rome. Let's start in the heart of the Middle Ages around the year 1250. You are a peasant. You live in a wooden shack on the edge of a village, surrounded by fields. Inside your home, there's a small hearth, a straw mattress, and maybe a pig or two. What there isn't is a toilet. So where do you go? Simple. You walk outside, maybe behind your house, into the woods, or near a compost pile. You squat, you do your business, you wipe with moss, straw, a handful of leaves. Or nothing. Then you move on with your day. There's no soap, no toilet paper, no water to wash with. And if it's cold or dark or raining, you use a bucket inside a chamber pot, which you'll empty into the ditch behind your home. Or just toss out the door. This was normal. Nobody found it strange. Everyone did it. Now imagine that, multiplied by every household in your village. By noon, the paths are streaked with waste. Chickens peck at it, dogs sniff it. Pigs root through it, kids play nearby, barefoot, touching everything. And still, this is nothing compared to the city. Let's take a walk through medieval Paris. Not the city of lights, but the city of odors. The streets are narrow, the buildings lean inward, and above you, windows open not for fresh air, but for convenience. At any moment, someone might toss out their chamber pot. If they're polite, they yell, "Cardinal!" Watch out for the water. If they're not, you get soaked. Beneath your feet, open gutters carry human and animal waste through the streets. These gutters clog constantly, with slop, with food scraps, with blood from the butcher. And when it rains, it floods. People walk through it all, then into bakeries, markets, and churches. No one washes their hands. Soap is rare. Water is often filthy. But here's the thing. No one blames the waste. Disease, they believe, comes from smells bad air, called miasma. So they carry herbs in their pockets. They burn incense in the streets. They even wear masks filled with flowers, not to protect from germs. They don't know what germs are. They just want to block the stink. Let's visit a castle now. Surely the nobles had it better. In some ways, yes. Castles often had garderobed small stone rooms jutting out from the walls with a hole in the floor. You sat, you did your business. It fell down a shaft into a cesspit, or a moat, or onto the hillside below. Luxury, right? Except it wasn't. The stone was freezing. The smell was unbearable. And the waste, it didn't go away. It built up, piled up, until someone, usually a servant, had to shovel it out. Those servants? They were called gong farmers in England. They climbed into cesspits with buckets and shovels and dug out the filth, sometimes chest deep, in the dark, gasping for air. Some suffocated, some drowned. Still think the Middle Ages were romantic? Even kings weren't spared. Henry VIII, for instance, had a personal groom of the stool, a man whose literal job was to wipe the royal backside, a position of great trust, oddly enough, because in the medieval mind, intimacy brought influence. And if you were sick, doctors had no answers. No sterilization. No hygiene. No idea that poop carried disease. They bled you. They gave you purgatives medicines to make you vomit or defecate even more. They lanced boils, they sniffed your urine. But they didn't tell you to wash your hands, because again, they didn't know. The church, meanwhile, had its own ideas. Cleanliness, they taught, was vanity. Bathing was sinful. It tempted lust. So public bathhouses, once common in the early Middle Ages, began to close, and dirt became a badge of piety. Ironically, monasteries were often cleaner. Monks followed routines including bathing and washing. Some even had primitive plumbing, aqueducts, or sewage channels. But they were the exception, not the rule. For most of Europe, filth was a fact of life. And life was short. Diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, these weren't minor inconveniences. They were killers. A child with diarrhea could die in days. A contaminated well could wipe out a village. And when the Black Death arrived, it found a perfect home. By the end of the 14th century, 1/3 of Europe was dead. The fleas and rats spread it, yes, but the cities the waste helped it thrive. And still, people didn't connect the dots. Not yet. It would take another 400 years before science caught up, before people understood bacteria, before someone finally said, hey, maybe we shouldn't drink the same water we defecate in. That revolution, the sanitation revolution, would change everything. But that's a story for later. For now, just remember, behind every knight's tale, every courtly romance, every medieval painting of banquet halls and battles, was a world that stank. A world without toilets, without plumbing, without even the word hygiene. A world where you pooped wherever you could. We left off in a world knee-deep in its own waste where cities stank, rivers ran brown, and no one really understood why people kept getting sick. But the Middle Ages weren't static. They changed slowly, unevenly, and often out of desperation. Let's rewind to the 12th century in England. As towns grew, the sheer volume of human waste reached crisis levels. People began falling ill more frequently. The gutters overflowed. Wells were fouled. And so, a radical idea emerged. Maybe we need rules. Medieval cities began passing sanitation laws, not because they understood disease, but because the smell, the bad air, was seen as spiritually and physically dangerous. And so the first public health ordinances were born. London, 1371. The city council orders that dung heaps must be moved out of the center of town. But where to put them? Outside the walls. So the poor suffer most. Paris, 1280. Residents are fined for tossing waste out windows. Instead, they're told to collect it and dispose of it in specific pits. But enforcement is weak. And people still dump. Florence, 1345. Engineers begin designing underground drains. Not sewers in the modern sense, but stone channels to redirect rainwater and filth away from central areas. A marvel if they hadn't clogged every few weeks. These weren't universal or even particularly effective. But they were attempts. Clumsy, smelly attempts to confront a growing crisis. Because by now, it wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Let's talk cesspits. A cesspit is, essentially, a hole in the ground lined with stone or timber. Waste went in and stayed there. When it filled up, and it always did, someone had to empty it. In towns, these were common. Some households even shared one. But cesspits leaked. Into the soil, into the groundwater, into nearby wells. Imagine drinking water that filtered through human feces. That's what people did. And they got sick, again and again. But they didn't blame the water. They blamed the stars, or witches, or moral decay, anything but the waste. Let's step into a medieval inn. There's no running water, no soap, no outhouse, unless it's in a distant corner of the courtyard. Inside, a chamber pot under the bed, shared by all the guests on that floor. The food is good spice to cover the taste of spoilage. The wine is watered down. The air smells of wood smoke, sweat, wet wool, and urine. This is normal. No one flinches. Now zoom out. This was the reality not just for the poor, but for most people. Kings had gold chamber pots. Peasants used clay. But the method was the same. Contain it, dump it, repeat. What about women? They had it worse. Travel was difficult. Privacy was rarer. And if they were menstruating, there were no pads, no tampons, just rags, changed in secret, washed when possible, reused again and again. There were no public bathrooms for them, no gender separation. If you needed to go, you found a corner, or you waited. In monasteries, things were different. Monks lived according to strict rules. Cleanliness was spiritual discipline. They had lavatoriums, hand washing stations, and sometimes even rudimentary plumbing systems. Some monasteries built long reredouters, communal latrines over running streams, not out of medical knowledge but religious order. Ironically, these monks lived cleaner than most nobles. Now picture Venice, a city of canals, no streets, no carts, just boats and water. Beautiful? Yes. Sanitary? Absolutely not. People dumped chamber pots directly into the canals. Waste floated past doorsteps. Laundry was washed in the same water where people urinated. Still think gondola rides are romantic? And yet, life carried on. Children grew up playing beside cesspools. Adults ate beside gutters. Food was cooked near latrines. Over time, people developed stronger stomachs, maybe some immunity, but they were always at risk. Let's fast forward to 1347. The Black Death arrives. Fleas on rats, rats on ships, ships in harbors, from Constantinople to Sicily, to Marseille, to London. In less than 4 years, over 25 million people in Europe are dead. 1 in 3, they die coughing, bleeding, fevered. No one knows why. The church blames sin. Doctors blame bad air. But the rats feast on waste. The fleas breed in straw bedding. The sickness thrives in unwashed, overcrowded bodies. Some cities panic. They try mass graves, quarantines, bonfires of clothing. In Milan, they brick up entire houses. In Avignon, they build new cemeteries overnight. In England, Parliament flees London. But nowhere is safe. And still, no one connects the dots. Not the waste. Not the water. Because the idea of invisible killers of microbes doesn't exist. It won't for centuries. Yet, amid the chaos, something shifts. People start to notice patterns. Towns that keep the streets cleaner, fewer deaths. Areas with latrines far from water sources, healthier. Maybe, just maybe, the waste matters. This realization won't blossom until the 17th and 18th centuries, but its seeds are planted in plague-soaked soil. And from it will grow a revolution, one not of steel or fire, but of soap and sewage. But before we get there, there's still more muck to wade through. Because even in the aftermath of the deadliest pandemic in history, the cities still stink, the chamber pots still fly, and the people still poop wherever they can. The world has just witnessed death on a scale it could barely comprehend. The Black Death swept through cities, manors, farms, abbeys, indiscriminate, brutal, and fast. And while no one understood the mechanism, something changed. Europe didn't become clean overnight, but a seed had been planted, one that would very slowly grow into something resembling public health. Let's begin in the wake of the plague in the late 14th century. Cities were nearly empty. Entire neighborhoods stood abandoned. Farmland went untended. The labor force collapsed, and into this vacuum came 2 forces: necessity and opportunity. With fewer people, land became available. Wages rose. Towns had to reorganize, and this reorganization, chaotic as it was, included sanitation. Let's take London. After repeated plague outbreaks, the city began a series of ordinances. Dung heaps must be moved farther out. Slaughterhouses relocated. Butchers required to clean blood from gutters daily. Open latrines? Fined. Cesspits overflowing? Fined again. But here's the issue. Enforcement was spotty. Corruption was rampant. And the people tasked with cleaning the gong, farmers and rakers, were paid so little and treated with such contempt, many simply walked off the job. So the streets filled again. Still, not all was failure. In some wealthy cities, especially trading hubs like Lübeck, Venice, and Bruges, waste management became a matter of economic survival. Traders didn't want to dock in foul-smelling ports. So, city councils built more drains, constructed cesspits beneath streets, began collecting waste at public expense. Yes, some of it still ended up in rivers, but at least it was being collected. And then there were the engineers. Long-forgotten Roman texts began circulating again, writings by Vitruvius, drawings of aqueducts, of sewers. Scholars translated and copied these works by hand. And suddenly, a thought. What if we brought water into the city and carried waste out? It sounded impossible. Most medieval towns had no running water. Water was fetched in buckets. But in the 15th century, cities began experimenting. Public fountains, gravity-fed pipes, wooden conduits, lead pipes if you could afford it. Did it work? Sometimes. In Siena, Italy, engineers constructed a complex system of underground channels, the bottini, to bring clean water into the city from miles away. They were dark, cramped, and prone to collapse. But they worked, and they're still there. In London, conduit houses were built to store and distribute water. Anyone could collect it, though rich households often paid boys to fetch it daily. At the same time, attention turned to what was being dumped into water. Parliament passed laws banning butchers from slaughtering animals near the Thames. Tanneries were relocated. Fines for dumping waste into moats or rivers increased, but so did loopholes. You see, law was one thing, culture was another. For generations, people had seen waste as part of life. It was normal for pigs to root through it, for urine to run in the streets. Even when the laws changed, habits didn't. And then came printing. In 1450, Johannes Gutenberg's press changed everything. Now, ideas could spread faster than ever. Hygiene manuals began circulating, some religious warning of impurity, some practical instructions for midwives, herbalists, barbers. They taught about washing, about smells, about isolating the sick, and while they still didn't understand germs, they began promoting cleanliness as virtue, not just for monks, for everyone. Meanwhile, another crisis was unfolding. By the early 1500s, the great cities of Europe were overwhelmed again. Population growth had returned, and with it, disease. Plague never really left. It came in waves. The sweating sickness hit England. Dysentery tore through France. And in Spain and Italy, syphilis, newly introduced from the Americas, spread like wildfire. Doctors were helpless. Still using leeches, still relying on astrology. But this time, some began to observe patterns. A physician in Milan notes, "Those who live near waste die first." A Dutch herbalist writes, "Foul water brings fever." A priest in Cologne warns against mixing waste with drinking water. They don't use the word bacteria, but they're circling closer. Let's pause and visit an average 15th century household. It's 2 rooms, maybe 3. The chamber pot is emptied into a shared street drain. The washing basin is filled by bucket from a public fountain. There is no soap, not as we know it, just ash and animal fat. Clothing is washed once a week. Bodies? Less often. But now there's a shift. Bathhouses are returning not just for the rich. Some towns subsidize them. Others ban them, fearing immoral behavior. It's a tug of war between hygiene and morality. Still, slowly, cleanliness becomes desirable. Not just holy. In the courts of France and England, perfumes rise in popularity, but also scented waters. Toilets, meaning grooming routines, become fashionable. The word itself comes from toile, a cloth, a dressing cloth, a sign of personal care. We're not at modern sanitation yet, not even close. But the foundations are there. Waste pits are being moved farther from homes. Water channels are being improved. And in some towns, fines are enforced finally for dumping into public spaces. Yet, all of this depends on wealth. The poor still live above cesspits, still fetch water, still dump waste into rivers. Disease still stalks them daily. But for the first time, Europe is beginning to question the filth. Not just enduret. The Renaissance brought a rebirth of art, science, and reason. But behind the paintings and books, another story was unfolding. One that flowed beneath the surface, the story of sanitation. Cities were growing. So was the waste. And though people didn't yet understand germs, they were starting to wonder if cleanliness might be more than just virtuous. Maybe it was vital. Let's begin in Italy. In Florence, Venice, and Rome, people rediscovered Roman ruins. They found ancient sewers, aqueducts, latrines. The Romans had done it all before clean water in, waste out. Now, engineers and thinkers wanted to learn from them. In Milan, rainwater was redirected underground. In Padua, pipes were repaired. In Paris, the first stone sewer appeared in 1370. But progress was slow, expensive, fragile. In castles, nobles had private toilets called garderobes. Waste dropped down shafts into moats or pits. It was more advanced than before, but still not ideal. Most people still used chamber pots. They dumped them outside or in nearby rivers. For the poor, there were no real options at all. Waste was everywhere. Then came a big idea. In 1596, Sir John Harrington invented a flushing toilet. It was called the Ajax, a clever name that played on the slang word jakes. The design included a cistern above and a flush system below. It was elegant. It worked, but only one was ever built. Why? It was too complex, too expensive, and most homes didn't have running water to support it. Still, the idea existed now, waiting for its time. Meanwhile, public bathhouses started to return. They had closed during the plague years. People feared that bathing opened the pores to disease. But now, things were changing. In Germany, bathhouses became social spaces again. Men and women bathed together. They talked, ate, relaxed. In France and England, bathing became more private but more common. Soap also became easier to get. It was made from animal fat and lye. It smelled like herbs and smoke. Rough, yes, but better than nothing. In 17th century England, it became so popular that it was taxed. Still, change comes slowly. For every rich merchant with a washstand, there were 100 peasants without one. Amsterdam had paved streets, but rural towns in Poland were still mud and dung. Waste did not care about class. Ideas were spreading, though. Thanks to the printing press, hygiene guides began to appear. Pamphlets, handbooks, household advice, all promoting cleanliness. Not because of science, but because of what people had learned by watching. Filth brings fever. Foulest brings death. Keep your water clear, and your body will follow. These were not metaphors. They were the best guesses of the time. Let's go to Amsterdam in 1650. The Dutch led the way in water management. They began new drainage systems. Gutters were deepened, cesspools spaced apart. Waste collection improved at least a little. Now, let's look at London. The Thames River had become a liquid sewer. Raw waste, chemicals, dead animals all dumped in. The city had grown fast, but the infrastructure had not. Travelers complained about the smell. Diplomats avoided the river, but people still drank from it, still washed in it, still cooked with it, because they had no choice. Then, in 1665, the plague returned. Over 100 people died in under a year. Families were sealed in their homes, doors marked with red crosses. Lord have mercy upon us, painted on the walls. The dead were buried in mass graves. The smell was unbearable. And then, in 1666, the city burned. The Great Fire of London destroyed thousands of homes. Entire neighborhoods were lost. It was a tragedy, but also a chance. In the rebuilding, planners made wider streets, better drainage, stone houses instead of wood. Some talked about sewers, public toilets, even health-focused city design. Most of those dreams were never completed. But the city was cleaner than before. Across Europe, a new era was rising. The Enlightenment. Cleanliness became a sign of status. Powdered wigs, perfumed gloves, white linen. These weren't just fashion, they were symbols. I am rich, I am refined, I am clean. But were they really? Not always. Many nobles avoided baths. They believed water made the body weak. Instead, they wiped with cloth and powder. Perfume hid the smell. Layers of linen soaked up sweat. Still, hygiene became performative, and that helped. The rich began building private washrooms, small rooms with pots and wash basins. Some even had basic flushing toilets fed by rooftop water tanks. But those were rare and expensive. For most people, nothing changed. A bucket, an alley, a gutter, a river. The city still stank. The rivers still poisoned. The people still died. But now, for the first time, there was a shift. People were not just asking how to get rid of waste. They were asking why it mattered. They didn't yet know about germs. But they knew this. Where the waste was thickest, the deaths came fastest. And they were tired of dying. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. Cities swelled with workers. Factories lit up the skyline. Steam powered progress. But underneath that progress, quite literally, the streets filled with waste. London was bursting. By 1850, over 2 million people called it home. And most of them were using the same solution for waste, a bucket and a hope that the rain would carry it away. Sewers, water treatment, non-existent. Chamber pots emptied into alleyways, and from there into the Thames, the same river that brought London life and death. Then came cholera, each outbreak more deadly than the last. It struck without mercy. People died in hours. No one knew why. Doctors blamed fog. Priests blamed sin. Politicians blamed the poor. But one man started asking different questions. Dr. John Snow. He studied the patterns. He mapped the deaths. He noticed that whole families were dying, while others on the same street were untouched. And all those who fell sick, they drew water from the same pump. Broad Street. He removed the handle. The outbreak slowed. Some laughed at him, others dismissed him. But for the first time, someone had shown, not guessed, how sanitation was life or death. Still, the city did nothing, until the smell became too much. The great stink of 1,858. That summer, the Thames dried just enough to reveal the truth. It was a flowing sewer, a river of rot, waste baking under the sun. The smell blanketed the city like smoke. Parliament tried to meet and fled. Newspapers demanded action. No more theories, no more reports. The filth was now in everyone's nose. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, an engineer. Calm, methodical, brilliant. He didn't give speeches. He drew plans, massive ones. He proposed a modern marvel, a network of underground brick sewers. Deep, wide, sloped just right. Gravity would carry waste away from the city. People laughed. It would cost too much, take too long, disrupt everything. And then, he built it anyway. By the end of the century, London's waste no longer poisoned its people. Cholera never returned. Bazalgette didn't just lay brick. He laid the foundation of public health. He proved that infrastructure was not just a matter of convenience, it was survival. Other cities followed. Paris began to dig. Berlin widened its drains. New York rerouted waste into the ocean. Sanitation had become a new kind of revolution, silent, invisible, but just as world-changing as steam and steel. For the first time in history, people weren't just surviving filth. They were learning to defeat it. But it came at a cost. Centuries of suffering, millions of deaths, and a lesson we nearly missed. That civilization isn't measured by how it grows, but by what it chooses to clean up. The story of sanitation isn't a story of toilets. It's the story of humanity looking at its own waste and deciding to do better. That decision began underground, in the sewers, in the stink, in the silence. And from there, the modern world began to rise brick by brick, tunnel by tunnel, flush by flush, not with glory, not with gold, but with dignity